It hangs quietly in a private collection, dismissed for decades as harmless Southern nostalgia. A well-dressed plantation owner, a young enslaved woman standing just behind her shoulder. Painted smiles, perfect posture, oil on canvas. Nothing unusual, until a restoration expert noticed something that made him step back from the portrait and refuse to touch it again. A secret so forbidden for its time that it was never meant to be recorded, let alone preserved in paint. Because this was not a portrait of ownership. It was evidence, and once you see it, you can never unsee it. The plantation was called Ashwood Vale, nestled along the slow, choking bends of the Mississippi River. In the 1830s, it was considered prosperous, refined, and, by Southern standards, quietly respectable. Its owner, Margaret Whitcomb, was known as a widow of rare discipline. No children, no remarriage, no visible indulgences. She dressed in mourning black long after grief should have faded and spoke with a calm that unsettled even her closest neighbors. But what truly set her apart was her refusal to sell one enslaved woman, not for any price. The woman's name was Eliza. She was young, no more than 18 when the portrait was commissioned, but she carried herself with a stillness that drew attention. Not submission, not defiance. Something else. A quiet watchfulness, as though she were listening to a voice no one else could hear. Margaret insisted Eliza be included in the painting. This alone raised eyebrows. Slave owners rarely immortalized the enslaved in formal portraits. And when they did, those figures were pushed to the margins, faces blurred, bodies reduced to background. But in this painting, Eliza stands almost level with Margaret, not beside her, not behind her, aligned. The artist, a French-trained portraitist passing through Louisiana, hesitated. He later wrote in a private journal that the request felt wrong, though he couldn't explain why. Margaret was specific. Eliza must be painted with her right hand visible, her fingers slightly curled. No gloves. The painting took weeks. During that time, strange things were reported at Ashwood Vale. The artist complained of dreams where he woke unable to move, convinced someone was standing at the foot of his bed counting his breaths. A house servant swore she heard two women whispering late at night in the parlor. Yet when she checked, only Margaret sat there, alone, staring at the fireplace. Eliza was never seen after dusk. No one could recall her sleeping quarters. No one saw her eat. And when asked where Eliza had come from, Margaret gave the same answer every time. She's always been here. The portrait was completed in early spring. Margaret approved it immediately. The artist refused to sign it. Within a year, the painter would be dead, found drowned in a shallow river, his fingers bent inward as though clawing at something unseen. The portrait, however, endured. After the Civil War, Ashwood Vale was abandoned. The house fell into rot. Records burned. Graves unmarked. But the painting survived, passed quietly through private collections, mislabeled, misdated, misunderstood. Until 1998. That was when Dr. Alan Mercer, a conservation expert specializing in antebellum art, was hired to restore the portrait for auction. At first glance, he saw nothing remarkable. Then he began cleaning Eliza's hand. Beneath layers of age-darkened varnish, something emerged that should not have existed. Something so dangerous for its time that no one would dare depict it openly. A marking. Not decorative. Not tribal. Not accidental. A symbol, etched into the skin of her palm with surgical precision. A symbol Margaret Whitcomb could read. And one Eliza did not carry by choice. Dr. Mercer cross-referenced the symbol with medical texts, plantation records, and forbidden spiritual manuscripts outlawed in the South. What he discovered changed the meaning of the portrait forever, because Eliza was not simply enslaved. She was bound. And Margaret Whitcomb was not simply her owner, she was her keeper. As Mercer studied the painting further, he noticed something else. Something so subtle it had escaped detection for over a century. Eliza's shadow did not match her body. It stretched in the wrong direction, and it did not belong to her alone. Dr. Mercer told himself shadows were deceptive. Old oil paintings played tricks with light, especially when the varnish aged unevenly. He had restored hundreds of portraits, mourning mothers, dead children posed as sleeping, husbands painted beside wives who had already been in the ground for weeks. But this shadow was wrong. Eliza's body leaned subtly forward, her shoulders narrow, her chin lowered in obedience. Yet the shadow behind her stretched taller, broader, its head tilted at an angle her neck could not achieve. And there was a second distortion. The shadow's hand was open. Eliza's hand in the painting was curled. The shadow's hand was not. Mercer documented everything. High-resolution photographs, infrared scans, pigment analysis. The symbol on Eliza's palm was not painted over skin tones. It was embedded beneath them, as if the artist had layered flesh around the mark rather than placing it on top. That was impossible. Unless the artist had been copying something that already existed. Mercer searched plantation medical records from the region. Most were incomplete. Some were intentionally destroyed. But one ledger survived. A physician's notes from 1832, written in cramped, hurried script. Female subject exhibits prolonged wakefulness. Responds to verbal instruction without audible speech. Mark applied to palm to stabilize episodes. Owner insists procedure continue despite risk. No name, but the plantation address matched Ashwood Vale. The next entry was worse. Subject displays memory, recall inconsistent with age. Speaks names of deceased individuals with accuracy impossible to verify. Claims she hears them beneath the house. Mercer stopped reading. That night, he dreamed of hands, not reaching for him, waiting. When he woke, his right palm burned. In the morning, he noticed faint red impressions along his skin, as though he had been gripping something sharp in his sleep. He returned to the painting. Margaret Whitcomb's face had always bothered him. Her expression was not proud, not stern, not affectionate. It was controlled, measured, like someone standing beside a loaded weapon. Under magnification, Mercer noticed hairline cracks around her eyes, tiny fractures in the paint where darker pigment showed through. He enhanced the contrast. Margaret's pupils had been altered, painted over. Originally, they were wider, dilated, almost fearful. Why would a plantation owner be afraid of her slave? Mercer expanded his research beyond art and medicine. He looked into folklore, specifically practices whispered about but never written openly in the Deep South. There were stories, always dismissed, always ridiculed. Women who kept certain enslaved people not for labor but for protection. Individuals believed to be born with what the old texts called second memory, the ability to retain fragments of consciousness after death, to hear what lingered in places soaked with suffering. Such people were dangerous and valuable. The symbol on Eliza's palm appeared again in a banned 1811 pamphlet seized by Louisiana authorities. The pamphlet described a ritual of containment, a way to anchor a receiver to a living keeper, preventing them from being overwhelmed by the voices of the dead. The receiver would not age normally, would not sleep normally, would not die easily. But without the mark, the voices would take control. Mercer's hands trembled as he looked back at the painting. Eliza's eyes, they were not focused on Margaret. They were focused beyond the frame, at the viewer, as if she had been waiting. That evening, Mercer received an email from the auction house. They wanted to know why restoration had halted. He typed a reply, deleted it. Instead, he locked the studio door and stayed late, alone with the portrait. At precisely 11:47 p.m., the temperature dropped. Not gradually, instantly. The infrared camera activated on its own. On the monitor, Eliza's shadow moved, not the painted figure. The shadow. It raised its open hand. Mercer backed away, heart pounding, breath shallow. He told himself it was equipment malfunction, heat variation, anything. But then he heard it. A voice, not from the painting, from beneath the floorboards. A woman's voice, soft and layered with others beneath it, speaking words Mercer understood without knowing how. She promised you wouldn't listen. The lights went out. In the darkness, Mercer felt something press into his palm. Cold, flat, deliberate. When the power returned seconds later, the studio was empty. The portrait stood where it always had, except Eliza's hand was no longer curled. Her fingers were open, and the symbol was gone, burned into Mercer's skin instead. Mercer wrapped his burned palm in gauze, though he knew it was useless. The mark wasn't a wound, it was an imprint. The skin hadn't blistered or broken. It had accepted the symbol, as if it belonged there. He did not leave the studio. Something in him understood that stepping outside would be a mistake. The house, no, the land was listening. Ashwood Vale did not release people once it had chosen them. The plantation had been abandoned for decades, yet its rules still applied. He uncovered the painting again. Eliza's posture had changed. It was subtle, the kind of difference only someone who had stared at the same image for weeks would notice. Her shoulders were no longer sloped in submission. They were level, balanced. Her chin had lifted just enough to suggest intention. Margaret Whitcomb, by contrast, looked diminished. Her painted hand, once resting possessively on Eliza's shoulder, now hovered a fraction of an inch away, as if she could no longer touch her. Mercer searched county death records from 1830 to 1845. Plantation owners, overseers, enslaved people, children. A pattern emerged slowly, horribly. Every death connected to Ashwood Vale shared the same notation. Cause, sudden collapse. Remarks, body unmarked. No illness, no injury, just silence. Then he found the last entry. Eliza, no surname listed. Status, property, disposition, unaccounted for. Not deceased, not freed, gone. Margaret Whitcomb's death, recorded 3 months later, was far more detailed. Cause, cardiac arrest following acute psychological distress. Witnesses report subject screaming names of deceased persons for several hours prior to death. Mercer sat back. Margaret hadn't controlled Eliza. She had depended on her. The folklore texts had warned of it. Receivers could hear what lingered, unfinished thoughts, violent deaths, memories soaked into wood and soil. But the voices demanded balance. They needed an anchor, a keeper, someone to absorb the overflow. Margaret Whitcomb hadn't owned Eliza. She had been protected by her. Mercer understood now why the painting existed. It wasn't a portrait. It was a binding, painted during a precise lunar phase, using pigments mixed with plantation soil, animal bone, and blood from both women. The symbol on Eliza's palm wasn't restraint. It was transfer. When Margaret died, the bond should have ended. But something went wrong. Eliza didn't disappear. She stayed. And waited. The studio floor creaked. Not footsteps, pressure, as if the building itself were adjusting its weight. Mercer stood, heart hammering, and followed the sound to the far wall where old crates from the auction house were stacked. One had not been opened. The manifest listed it as, quote, supplemental materials, provenance unknown. Inside were letters. Margaret Whitcomb's letters, written in the last weeks of her life. She no longer sleeps when I command it. She hears them before I do now. She says they are angry with me. Another letter, hands shaking so badly the ink tore the page. I was never meant to be keeper forever. I was supposed to pass her on, but there is no one left worthy. If I release her, they will come for me first. The final letter was different. Short, careful. If you are reading this, it means I failed. She will seek another hand. Do not let her choose you. The temperature dropped again. Mercer felt the pressure in his palm intensify, the symbol pulsing in slow, deliberate rhythm like a second heart. The painting cracked, not shattered, opened. A thin fracture split the canvas at Eliza's wrist. Dark seeped through, not paint but absence, swallowing light itself. The studio filled with sound, whispers layered over whispers, hundreds of voices overlapping in desperate urgency. Names, dates, last breaths. Eliza stepped forward, not climbing out of the painting, becoming present. Her form resolved slowly, like a photograph developing in chemical bath. Her feet touched the floor without sound. Her eyes, no longer painted, met Mercer's. They were not cruel. They were exhausted. She lied, Eliza said. Her voice carried many echoes, but the words were clear. She said I would be free when she died. Mercer couldn't speak. Eliza raised her hand. The symbol glowed faintly. His symbol now. I need another keeper, she continued. The dead are loud. They have waited a long time. The whispers swelled, pressing against Mercer's skull. He felt memories that were not his. Rope burns, childbirth screams, shallow graves, nails clawing coffin wood. I can't, he managed. Eliza tilted her head, almost curious. You already have, she said. The studio door slammed shut. The lights exploded. In the darkness, Mercer understood the final truth. The portrait had never been meant to warn viewers. It was meant to select them, and the hands in the painting had always been the key. The darkness did not stay dark. It thickened. Mercer felt it pressing against his eyes, his lungs, his thoughts, like wet soil packed into a grave too shallow. The whispers sharpened into individual voices now, no longer a mass but a crowd. Men, women, children, some sobbing, some furious, some pleading in languages Mercer did not recognize but somehow understood. Eliza did not move closer. She didn't need to. The bond was already sealed. You feel them, she said. That means you're listening. Mercer collapsed to one knee. The symbol burned hotter, not like fire but like friction, as if something were being dragged across his nerves from the inside. Images flooded him, uncontrolled. A boy chained to a post behind the plantation kitchen, tongue swollen from thirst. A woman buried without a coffin, dirt packed into her mouth to stop the screaming. A man hanged, cut down too soon, lungs still fighting for air as he was thrown into a pit. Mercer screamed. The sound was swallowed. No one hears you here, Eliza said softly. That was the rule. He clawed at the floorboards, leaving bloody trails. Why me? He gasped. Why now? Eliza looked past him, toward the windows, where moonlight struggled against something thick and wrong. Because Ashwood Vale is waking, she said, and I can no longer hold them alone. The house answered her words. Walls groaned. Nails creaked. The floor beneath Mercer's hands pulsed, not moved, pulsed like muscle. He realized then that the plantation wasn't haunted. It was occupied. Mercer staggered to his feet. There has to be another way. Burn the painting. Destroy it. Eliza's expression hardened for the first time. They tried. The walls changed. Not physically, but remembered. Mercer saw overlays of the past bleeding into the present. Enslaved hands painting symbols beneath candlelight. Margaret Whitcomb standing behind Eliza, trembling as Eliza guided her brush. blood mixed into pigment, prayers spoken backward. "You think the painting binds me," Eliza continued. "It doesn't. It binds them." The whispers surged again, angrier now. "They don't want release," Mercer said, suddenly understanding. "They want continuity." Eliza nodded once. "They want someone to listen forever." A sharp crack echoed through the studio. One of the crates burst open. Inside were bones, not loose, arranged. Hands, wired together at the wrists. Each palm bore the same symbol. Mercer retched. "Keepers before Margaret," Eliza said. "Before the Whitcombs. Before names were written down." "How many?" Mercer whispered. Eliza did not answer. She lifted her gaze to him, and for the first time there was urgency in her voice. "They are learning how to reach beyond this land. Through records. Through images. Through curiosity." Mercer's blood ran cold. "You mean?" "The portrait was photographed," Eliza said. "Shared. Studied. Enlarged." Mercer remembered the article. The way readers had commented that the longer they stared at the image, the stranger it felt. The headaches. The dreams. The symbol wasn't just a mark. It was a doorway. "They don't need the plantation anymore," Mercer said. "No," Eliza agreed. "They need you." The house shook violently now. From below came a sound Mercer had no words for, wood splintering under pressure from the wrong side. The dead weren't whispering anymore. They were knocking. Eliza stepped closer at last. Her presence was heavy, ancient, and unbearably human. "I didn't choose this," she said quietly. "But I will not be the last." She placed her hand over Mercer's marked palm. The symbol flared white-hot, and Mercer saw the future. Screens glowing in dark rooms, faces staring too long at old photographs. Hands twitching, itching, marks appearing overnight on skin that had touched nothing. The dead learning new ways to speak. When the light faded, Mercer was alone. The studio was silent. The painting was blank, but the mark on his hand was complete. And somewhere far away, someone else had just begun to listen. Mercer did not leave Ashwood Vale the next morning. He tried. At first light, he packed his notes, camera, and recorder with shaking hands. The plantation looked almost peaceful in the dawn. White columns, Spanish moss swaying gently, birdsong cutting through the memory of screams. For a moment, he wondered if the night had broken him, if exhaustion had stitched nightmares into his waking mind. Then he reached the front gate. The iron bars were twisted inward, as if clenched by fists from the other side. Rust flaked under his touch, warm and damp, staining his palms red. The road beyond shimmered strangely, like heat over asphalt. Though the air was cool, Mercer stepped forward. The ground dropped out from under him. He didn't fall far, just enough to understand the warning. The earth swallowed his boots to the ankle, thick and sucking, like fresh grave soil. When he pulled free, the imprint left behind wasn't a footprint. It was a handprint. He backed away slowly. The mark on his palm burned in response, pulsing in time with something deeper, older, beneath the land. The whispers returned, not loud, not frantic, but expectant. They were waiting for him to stop resisting. Mercer retreated into the house. Inside, Ashwood Vale had changed. The air was warmer, heavier. Dust motes drifted in deliberate patterns, spiraling instead of floating. The walls bore faint discolorations now, shadows that didn't belong to anything present. When Mercer passed mirrors, his reflection lagged a fraction of a second behind. He avoided looking too closely. The studio door was gone. Where it had been was only smooth wall, unbroken, as though it had never existed. Panic surged, sharp and bright. He ran down the hall, opening rooms at random. Bedrooms he had not seen before opened onto him. Rooms furnished for children, small beds. Hand-carved toys. Scratches on the walls at heights no adult would make. And on every nightstand, drawings, crude charcoal sketches of hands. Hands bound. Hands bleeding. Hands reaching upward from the ground. Mercer stumbled back into the main hall, heart hammering. "This isn't real," he said aloud, clinging to the sound of his own voice. "It's a response. Trauma imprinted on place." The house answered. A floorboard creaked behind him. Mercer turned slowly. Eliza stood at the far end of the hall, unchanged. Same dress. Same posture. Same eyes that had watched centuries pass without blinking. "You shouldn't wander," she said. "They get confused when you do." "You trapped me," Mercer said. His voice cracked. "You said I'd be free." Eliza's expression softened, but it was not comfort. "I said you would understand." She stepped closer, and the shadows followed her like obedient animals. "They don't want you to leave because you are working," she continued. "Whether you mean to or not, Mercer looked down. His hands were covered in charcoal dust. He hadn't touched anything. On the wall beside him, a new drawing had appeared, fresh, dark, still smudged at the edges. A man standing in a doorway. Marked palm raised. "They're using me," Mercer said. Eliza nodded. "They always do." Not knocking anymore. As if something was learning how to climb, Mercer backed away. "What happens if I refuse?" Eliza's gaze flicked briefly toward the floor, then back to him. "Then they begin, without permission." The temperature dropped suddenly. Mercer's breath fogged. From the corners of the hall, shapes emerged. Not bodies, not ghosts, but impressions, like memories forced into 3 dimensions. Necks bent at wrong angles. Faces half-formed, mouths stretched open in silent instruction. Mercer screamed again, but this time the sound echoed. The house was no longer swallowing noise. It was amplifying it. Eliza raised her voice over the growing pressure. "They've been silent too long. The world forgot them. Photographs gave them a language again." Mercer remembered the article. The forums. The readers who'd commented about strange dreams, about feeling watched after staring at the image too long. "You let it spread," he said. "I couldn't stop it," Eliza replied. "Once eyes see, they invite." The shapes pressed closer. Mercer felt something tug at his thoughts, not reading them, rewriting them, replacing memory with instruction. He saw flashes of himself uploading scans, restoring negatives, enhancing contrast, making the mark clearer. "No," he whispered. "I won't." The pain in his palm exploded. Mercer collapsed, clutching his hand. The symbol had changed, lines branching outward, growing more complex, less human. Eliza knelt beside him. "They are no longer bound to one keeper," she said quietly. "That's why they chose you." His vision blurred. Through the haze, Mercer saw the walls ripple, revealing layers beneath, decades stacked like sediment, bodies buried under floors, names scratched out of ledgers, children, born and erased. "You think this place is cursed," Eliza continued. "But it's organized." Mercer laughed weakly. "You're insane." Eliza smiled sadly. "No. I'm tired." She stood and stepped back. The shadows surged forward, and Mercer felt something new settle into his bones. Responsibility. Not forced. Accepted. The whispers softened into something almost grateful. When Mercer finally stood, the house was quiet again. Eliza was gone. In her place, on the wall behind where she had stood, was a portrait. A man, mid-30s. Eyes hollow. Right hand visible. Marked. Mercer reached up and touched the canvas. The paint was still wet. Mercer stood alone in the hall, staring at his own face staring back at him. The portrait wasn't an interpretation. It wasn't symbolic. Every detail was exact. The faint scar beneath his eye, the asymmetry of his lips, the exhaustion carved into his brow. Even the mark on his palm was rendered perfectly, its lines now impossibly intricate, almost moving when he wasn't looking straight at them. He stepped back. The house breathed, not metaphorically. The walls expanded and contracted with a slow, measured rhythm, like lungs that had learned patience over centuries. The whispers were gone. No screams, no pleas, only silence. The kind that follows obedience. Mercer understood then what Eliza had meant. The dead did not want freedom. They wanted preservation. He walked through the house, no longer stopped by doors that once refused him. Every room opened easily now, welcoming him like a remembered shape. Beneath floorboards he found nothing. Not bones, not chains, not hidden chambers. Because there was no need to hide anymore. Ashwood Vale had moved on. In the study, Mercer found his equipment neatly arranged. Camera cleaned. Notes rewritten in his handwriting, but not his words. Pages detailed restoration techniques, exposure corrections, ways to draw attention subtly to hands in old photographs. Instructions. At the bottom of the final page was a sentence he did not remember writing. History survives only when someone makes it visible. Mercer sat. The mark on his palm no longer burned. It pulsed calmly, like a second heart. Days passed. Or nights. Time behaved strangely now, stretching and compressing without warning. Mercer slept when the house dimmed, woke when it brightened. Hunger faded. So did fear. And then, connection. He felt it when the first email arrived. A museum archivist asking for help analyzing a damaged plantation portrait. A historian requesting consultation on a newly discovered negative. A journalist wanting insight into unsettling details found in old Southern photographs. Mercer answered them all. He did not lie. He simply guided attention. Soon the dreams began, not for him but for others. Viewers reporting headaches. Restlessness. The sense of being watched after studying restored images too closely. Forums filled with speculation. Comments appeared beneath articles. I can't stop thinking about their hands. Why does it feel like the photo is aware of me? Am I the only one who dreams after looking too long? Mercer watched it spread, calm and methodical. Ashwood Vale no longer needed to confine its dead to one place. They lived in contrast. In pixels. In attention. One night, though the concept of night felt optional now, Mercer stood before a mirror. For the first time, his reflection did not lag. It smiled before he did. Behind him, faintly visible in the glass, stood dozens of figures. Not threatening, not pleading, waiting. Mercer raised his marked hand. Somewhere far away, a reader paused on an image, zoomed in, and felt something stir. Old photographs are not memories. They are witnesses. Every face you study, every detail you linger on, every shadow you dismiss as coincidence, someone, somewhere, is listening through them. History doesn't stay buried because it's forgotten. It stays buried because it's waiting. You've been watching Forgotten Remains. And now that you've seen it, be careful what you look at twice.